Millionaire invited the black cleaning lady as a joke, but SHE showed up like a diva and everyone. "Go on, then," Julian Croft said, his voice echoing in the cavernous server room. The sound, slick with contempt, cut through the oppressive heat and high-pitched whine of failing machinery. He gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist, a diamond cufflink flashing under the harsh emergency lights. "You're always wiping the dust off the casings. Why don't you have a go at fixing what's inside?" A wave of stifled laughter rippled through the assembled executives and investors. Their tailored suits, costing more than she made in a month, seemed to shrink away from the woman in the center of the room, Ilara Vance. She stood frozen with a cleaning cloth in her hand, her simple gray janitorial uniform a stark island in a sea of expensive charcoal and navy fabrics. The air, thick with the metallic smell of ozone and the sour scent of corporate fear, crackled with a unique, refined cruelty. "Our best engineers, men from MIT, from Caltech, can't figure it out," Julian continued, his smile a predatory slash. He was a showman, turning a multi-million-dollar corporate disaster into a personal stage for his arrogance. He paced before the blinking server rack like a lion tormenting a mouse. "But perhaps we've been overlooking our greatest asset. Ilara, the queen of cleanliness. Maybe you can just wipe the problem away." More laughter, this time louder and sharper, egged on by a sycophantic senior VP named Brent. "Give her a feather duster, Julian." Ilara's eyes remained fixed on the source of their panic, the central server housing the company's entire logistical network. It wasn't just a machine. It was the company's heart, and it was dying. Red lights blinked in a frantic, irregular rhythm, a digital plea for help that no one understood. The whine was the sound of its pain. Ilara didn't look at the mocking faces. She didn't meet Julian's gaze. Her expression was a mask of unnerving stillness. To them, she was furniture, invisible until it was time for a joke. They saw a janitor, a nobody. They had no idea they were looking at the one person who understood that the machine's failure wasn't a technical glitch. It was a sin, an old one, buried deep in the building's very foundation. She subtly shifted her weight, her right hand slipping into her pocket. Her thumb moved with practiced speed across the screen of her phone, typing a single, swift message, her movements completely obscured by the folds of her uniform. "Well?" Julian pressed, his voice dripping with impatience. He loved this, holding the room's attention, wielding his power. "We're waiting. Don't be shy." Ilara's hand slid back out of her pocket. She let the gray cleaning cloth fall from her fingers. It drifted to the polished concrete floor, the small, soft sound swallowed by the server's scream. But in the charged silence of the room, it was her only act of defiance. A gauntlet, thrown down so quietly no one even knew the battle had begun. For 3 agonizing weeks, the machine had remained broken. Its official name was the Helios system, a multimillion-dollar marvel of integrated server and climate control networking that was supposed to be Julian Croft's crowning legacy. Now it was his albatross hanging heavy around the neck of his company. It had brought Croft Industries' global shipping operations to a grinding, catastrophic halt, hemorrhaging over $1 million a day. The team of high-priced specialists he'd flown in from Germany stood defeated in a corner, muttering to each other over laptops that displayed nothing but useless diagnostic codes and error logs. They were out of ideas. The investors, who had been brought in to witness the final stages of a glorious global expansion, were now the front-row audience to a complete and utter meltdown. Ilara had watched the chaos unfold from the periphery, a silent ghost polishing the glass walls of conference rooms where panicked meetings bled late into the night. She had emptied the trash cans filled with their discarded, failed theories. She had listened to the experts argue about cascading code failures, phantom data loops, and premature hardware decay, never once identifying the real fundamental problem. They were like doctors trying to cure a disease by looking at a photograph of the patient. They couldn't see the system's soul, because its true architect had been deliberately and systematically erased from history. The crowd of executives, taking their cue from their leader, continued their jeering. Brent, the VP, was the loudest. "Maybe she'll use a mop on it, Julian. That might work." he guffawed, clapping Julian on the back with a resounding thud. Most of the junior employees simply stared at the floor, their silence a thick blanket of complicity. Only David, a junior maintenance technician barely a year out of trade school, looked directly at Alara, his face pale with a mixture of pity and outrage. He was new, still young enough to feel the sting of second-hand humiliation. He knew this was wrong, a disgusting and cruel abuse of power, but he was powerless, just another cog in Julian's machine. He caught Alara's eye for a fleeting second, a silent, desperate apology in his gaze. Catherine Croft, Julian's wife, who stood draped in jewels near the door like an expensive ornament, finally touched her husband's arm. "Julian, honestly," she murmured, her voice carrying a faint note of objection born more of social embarrassment than moral outrage. "You're making a scene. This is hardly professional." Julian shrugged her off with a flick of his elbow. "Nonsense. It's a lesson in humility. Someone like her could use a reminder of her place." He was wrong. The lesson in humility was indeed coming, but it wasn't for her. From her vantage point, Alara saw the room not as a collection of people, but as a faulty circuit board. Julian was the processor, overheating with ego and spitting out corrupt commands. The executives were the useless capacitors, holding a charge of mockery but serving no real function, only adding to the noise. And the machine, the poor machine, was the heart, crying out from a wound no one else could see. Her calm wasn't born of apathy or fear. It was the quiet, focused serenity of a storm gathering its strength far out at sea. Some storms don't announce their arrival with thunder and lightning. They simply appear, silent and immense, ready to rewrite the entire landscape. She had spent 2 years cleaning this building, moving through its halls like a ghost. 2 years of listening, watching, and waiting. She knew every hum, every click, every sigh of the building's mechanical systems. She knew them because she had watched her father design them. She remembered the smell of graphite and paper as he sketched them at their small kitchen table, long before Julian Croft, his promising young protege at the time, stole the patents, destroyed his reputation, and left him a broken man with nothing but his memories. "I'll make you a deal, Alara," Julian announced, his voice booming with false magnanimity. He pulled a thick, gold-plated money clip from his pocket and theatrically peeled off a sheaf of bills. $1,000. Right here, right now. If you can even tell us what's wrong with it. Think of it as a bonus. He waved the cash in the air. You can finally buy yourself a new uniform. The insult, so sharp and deliberate, hung in the air. The executives chuckled obediently. David, the young technician, flinched as if he'd been physically struck. Alara's gaze drifted from the blinking red lights to Julian's smug face. There was no anger in her eyes, no fear. There was only a profound, unsettling stillness, a deep, patient focus that began to make the people closest to her feel a prickle of unease. The air around her seemed to thicken, the ambient noise of the room fading into a dull hum. This wasn't a janitor being humiliated. This was a predator, patiently waiting for her prey to wander deeper into the trap she had so carefully set. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "All right," Alara said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the tension like a shard of glass. "I'll take a look." For the first time that day, a flicker of something new crossed Alara's face. It wasn't a smile, not exactly. It was the ghost of one, a subtle upward turn of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. It was the private, knowing expression of a chess master who sees the final, winning move 20 steps ahead. The sight of it, so unexpected and out of place, made Julian's own smile falter for a microsecond. Alara walked forward, her soft-soled work shoes making no sound on the polished concrete floor. The crowd of suits parted for her, a strange, involuntary wave of motion, like iron filings repelled by a magnet. She didn't look at the baffled German engineers or their complex diagnostic equipment. She didn't glance at the main console that had been the sole focus of everyone's attention. Instead, she stopped before the server rack, her eyes scanning its metal surface with an unnerving familiarity. "I need the original design schematic," she said, her voice perfectly steady. carrying an authority that did not match her uniform. Printout, Revision B7. From the Deep Archive. One of the lead engineers, a man with a severe face named Klaus, scoffed audibly. Revision B7 is obsolete. It is irrelevant. We are on revision G12. The core code, the hardware integrations, they are entirely different. I know, Elara said without looking at him. That's why I need B7. The command, so specific and confident, sent a ripple of murmurs through the room. This was not the random guess of a janitor. Julian's face darkened, a flash of irritation crossing his features. What is this, a joke? Get her the damn paper, someone. Let's get this farce over with. The senior engineers hesitated, looking at each other with disdain. Brent, the VP, sneered. Now she's a historian. What's next? An archaeological dig. It was David, the junior technician, who moved. He scurried over to a dusty archive terminal in the corner, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He knew defying the room's hostile mood was a risk, but something in Elara's voice, a steel-like certainty, compelled him forward. He felt the glares of his superiors on his back. A moment later, a large, rolled-up blueprint spooled out of the old printer. He walked over and handed it to Elara, refusing to meet anyone's eyes but hers. "Thank you, David," she said quietly, her voice a small island of grace in a sea of contempt. Elara unrolled the blueprint on a nearby console table. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges. The room watched, their expressions a mixture of scorn and a burgeoning, reluctant curiosity. With the calm confidence of someone returning to a familiar, beloved place, she began to study the document, her finger tracing lines of ink that hadn't been seen in years. The last vestiges of cynical laughter died in the room, replaced by a tense, watching silence. Elara ignored them all, her focus absolute. For her, it was a silent conversation between her and the blueprint. The world shrank until it was only her, the schematic, and the vivid memory of her father's hands sketching these very lines at their small kitchen table, explaining to a 10-year-old Elara how a system needed to breathe. She located a specific junction on the blueprint, a nexus of coolant lines and pressure regulators. Then she walked to the side of the server rack. Away from the main control panel the other engineers had been fruitlessly prodding for weeks. She knelt, her movements fluid and sure. Her fingers traced the cool metal of the casing, finding the almost invisible seams of a small, unmarked service panel. It was flush with the casing, painted over so perfectly it was invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. With a firm, knowing press on a specific point, the panel clicked open. Inside was a small cluster of manual valves and thick copper wiring, the system's original, mechanical-based regulatory system. It was her father's failsafe, a brilliant piece of analog engineering in a digital world, long since bypassed and forgotten by Julian's so-called upgraded software. Her movements were economical and precise. She didn't hesitate for a second. Her left hand turned a small, dusty red valve a quarter-turn counterclockwise. Her right hand located a thin copper wire, an addition not present in the original design, and gently disconnected it from its terminal. She then reconnected the original dormant wire. It was a simple physical adjustment, an elegant solution that existed entirely outside the digital world the other engineers were trapped in. She was correcting a deliberate flaw, a piece of sabotage, a flaw Julian had introduced years ago to force her father out. He had created a bottleneck in the system's core hardware, a secret choke point, then blamed the unreliable original design when the system inevitably failed under stress. As she reconnected the final wire, the piercing whine of the failing server began to drop in pitch. The frantic shuddering of the machine lessened, the vibrations on the floor softening. A moment later, a deep, steady hum filled the room, the powerful, healthy sound of a heart finally beating correctly. The array of blinking red lights on the main console flickered once, twice, and then, one by one, turned to a solid, reassuring green. The visual change was immediate and undeniable. The emergency lights overhead, which had bathed the room in a hellish red glow, shut off with a click. The standard cool white lights hummed back to life, washing the room in clarity. On the main monitor, data streams that had been frozen error messages for weeks began to scroll by, green and healthy. The Helios system was stable. In less than 5 minutes, the cleaning lady had done what a team of internationally recognized experts couldn't do in 3 weeks. A collective gasp, sharp and loud, went through the room. The silence was no longer mocking. It was stunned. It was the sound of 100 arrogant assumptions shattering at once. The German engineers stared, open-mouthed, at their own monitors, which now displayed perfect system diagnostics across the board. Klaus, their leader, whispered a soft, "Mein Gott." Julian Croft looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face, once smug and arrogant, was now a ghastly mask of disbelief and rising panic. "It's a trick," he stammered, his voice loud and unsteady, breaking the stunned silence. "She did something. She probably broke it. She's voided the warranty." "Security." Alara rose slowly to her feet, turning to face him. Her calm was now a weapon, sharp and terrifying. "I didn't break it," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room with icy precision. "I fixed it." The primary coolant line was being diverted to a redundant heatsink post-initialization. It wasn't a software bug. It was a hardware flaw in the G-series revision. She paused, letting the words sink in. It was designed to fail under heavy load. She pointed a single, steady finger at the open panel. The original design had a manual bypass for just such a problem. "You painted over it." Every eye in the room swiveled from Alara to Julian. The investors, men who dealt in the cold, hard reality of facts and figures, looked at the perfectly running machine, then at the sputtering, desperate CEO. The power in the room had just reversed, completely and irrevocably. Brent, the sycophantic VP who had been laughing the loudest just minutes before, slowly began to back away from Julian, trying to disappear into the crowd. The tide had turned, and no one wanted to be standing next to the man about to drown. Just as Julian opened his mouth to shout another frantic accusation, the main doors to the server room slid open with a soft hiss. A man stood there, older and leaning heavily on a cane, but with eyes that burned with a fierce, undiminished intelligence. He wore a simple, worn coat that had seen better decades, and yet he commanded the attention of the entire room more effectively than Julian had with all his blustering. It was him, the man from Alara's text message. David, the junior technician, let out a small, audible gasp of recognition. He had made the call. Julian froze, the color draining completely from his face. He looked as if he had seen a ghost risen from a grave he himself had dug. "Arthur?" he breathed, his voice barely a whisper, robbed of all its earlier arrogance. "Arthur Vance, what are you doing here?" The old man, Arthur Vance, ignored Julian completely, as if he were a piece of distasteful furniture. His gaze was fixed on the purring server, a look of profound, paternal pride on his face. He then looked at Alara, his daughter, and a slow, warm smile spread across his lips, erasing years of hardship. The resemblance between them, in their quiet dignity, in the calm intensity of their eyes, was sudden, shocking, and unmistakable. "I see my girl still remembers how to treat my work," Arthur said, his voice raspy but firm. He took a slow, deliberate step into the room, his cane thudding softly on the concrete. "It seems you've been having some trouble with my system, Julian." An investor, a stern-faced man named Mr. Chun, who was the lead on the expansion deal, stepped forward. "Your system." Arthur Vance tapped the server rack with the tip of his cane, a gesture both proprietary and triumphant. "The Helios system. I designed it. I built the prototype in my garage with my own 2 hands. Before Mr. Croft here, my former assistant, convinced me to sell the patent for a fraction of its worth, and then spent the next decade telling the world it was his own creation." He turned his gaze to Julian, and for the first time, his calm expression hardened into one of cold, unforgiving steel. "This is my daughter, Alara Vance," Arthur announced to the silent, captive room. "And I believe she just saved your company." Julian sputtered, trying desperately to regain control, to spin a new reality. This is insane. He's a disgraced engineer. A nobody. This is a shakedown. He's been irrelevant for 20 years. Is it, Julian? Arthur said calmly. He pulled a slim tablet from his worn coat pocket. With a tap, he wirelessly connected it to the large monitor on the wall, the same one that now showed the system's perfect health. An image appeared for all to see, a scanned, high-resolution document. This, Arthur narrated, his voice steady and clear, a judge delivering a verdict, is my original, notarized design contract for the Helios prototype. Please note Clause 7b. The clause granting me permanent consulting rights and 5% of all future profits derived from this technology. A clause you told me was non-binding, a mere formality, and then had your lawyers bury under 3 layers of revisions. He swiped the screen. A new file appeared, an audio waveform. And this is a conversation from my last meeting with you, Julian. I had a feeling it might be important, so I recorded it. He pressed play. A voice filled the room. Julian's voice, younger but just as arrogant, dripping with venom. The patent is mine now, Arthur. If you ever try to claim credit for this, I will personally see to it that you never work in this industry again. I'll paint you as an unstable, washed-up hack. Your name will be mud. You will be nothing. A collective shockwave went through the crowd. Mr. Chan, the investor, turned to Julian, his face a mask of pure disgust. Is this true, Croft? Julian stood paralyzed, his face ashen, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He was exposed, his entire empire of lies crumbling around him in real time. The legal and financial implications were catastrophic: patent fraud, breach of contract, corporate sabotage, shareholder deception, ruin. He didn't have to answer. His phone began to ring, a shrill, panicked sound in the now silent room. The caller ID read, Chairman of the Board. He stared at it, horrified. Then a second phone, his personal one, began to buzz violently on his belt clip. A news alert from a major tech journal. The headline was visible even from a distance. Croft Industries, Helios legacy of fraud? Sources reveal. The story was already breaking. David had done more than just call her father. He had sent the evidence to the right people. Julian Croft didn't answer either phone. He simply stood there, a man publicly and completely defeated, as the foundations of his life turned to dust. 48 hours later, the fallout was absolute. The board of Croft Industries had summarily fired Julian Croft via a terse video call. A press release announced a full-scale, independent investigation into fraudulent and unethical business practices. A phrase that was corporate speak for total implosion. He was publicly shamed, his carefully constructed legacy revealed as a hollow theft. A multi-hundred-million-dollar lawsuit, filed by Arthur Vance, was just the beginning of his legal troubles. The SEC and multiple shareholder groups were already circling. In the same boardroom where Julian had once lorded his power, a room paneled in dark wood and arrogance, Arthur and Alara sat across from Mr. Chan and the new interim CEO. They didn't come with a team of lawyers. They came with the quiet authority of truth, which was far more powerful. The board, through the CEO, offered a full, unequivocal public apology and a settlement that not only restored Arthur's name but paid him every cent he was owed from the last 2 decades, with interest. Crucially, it also established a new, independent engineering division focused on innovation and ethics. We want you to lead it, Ms. Vance, the new CEO said, her tone respectful. Your father's genius, your expertise, your integrity. This company needs to be rebuilt from the foundation up. It needs you. Alara didn't accept immediately. She looked at her father, who gave her a small, proud nod, his eyes shining. She saw the offer for what it was, not a prize, but a responsibility. A chance to build something real on the ruins of a lie. That evening, Alara stood on the observation deck of the Croft Industries building, no longer in a janitor's uniform but in her own simple clothes. She looked down at the sprawling city lights, the building around her humming with a quiet, steady rhythm. A healthy, beating heart. Her victory wasn't loud or vengeful. It was as quiet and precise as the adjustments she'd made to the server. it was about restoring balance not just to a machine but to a life. It was about reclaiming a name, a history, and a family's stolen dignity. Ilara Vance turned a calculated moment of public humiliation into the catalyst for a silent, brilliant revolution. She had proven that true power isn't about the noise you make or the title you hold, but about the quiet competence and unshakable integrity you carry within. Justice, she now knew, was a machine that could be fixed. You just had to know where the original designer hid the controls.